You're listening to the Talking Headways Podcast Network.
Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on.
Happy Monday. This is Mondays at the Overhead Wire, sponsored by our generous Patreon supporters, or super generous Patreon supporters, I should say. I'm Jeff Wood, your host, and joined by Han Solo. That's right, every Wookiee's favorite right-hand man is here to save the day. But as we do, and we're Han Solo, we've got a preview of some upcoming Talking Headways episodes, and I'm sure a few of these you heard last time, but we're excited to share them again. So we had Diane Jones-Allen on last week to talk about the ASLA Climate Action Guide and a bit of her work on food deserts. I noticed some folks had questions about her definitions of food deserts, so keep on listening and keep on asking questions. We love it. She was also heavily involved in some of the work on the Claiborne Expressway in New Orleans, which we've talked to a number of folks on here, Talking Headways, about, which is really cool. And it's also funny because we also talked to Lynn Peterson, and her book mentioned Claiborne as well as some of the kind of community involvement activities that she talked about in her book, which is really cool. Lynn, who's the Oregon Metro Council president and former Washington State DOT director, had a whole chapter in her book about that Claiborne Expressway. So interesting, talking with Diane Jones-Allen and then talking with Lynn and having similar subjects be broached. So we chatted with Lynn recently too, and hopefully that will be coming up soon. That's recorded and getting edited as we speak. And finally, or not finally, I should say, and next, David Hencher is coming on to talk about mobility as a feature. I think I'm talking to him next week. Still, I don't know what that means, but I'm hoping to understand more soon so I can talk to him. Also, we've had some requests to talk about this huge chatbot thing that's going on. I'm not super familiar with it, but if folks want to hear more about urban planning, transportation planning specifically, and things like ChatGPT, let me know. I think it's a little bit overplayed at the moment. There's so much discussion about it, but I think it would also, if we can get some experts in, and I think I know a couple on the subject, that would be interesting. So if folks are interested in that, let me know. So I'd like to hear from folks and see it, kind of gauge the room, because I think it might be interesting, but it also is something that I know is kind of the hot topic right now. And typically we don't do super hot topics, but we try to keep up with that stuff on the news anyways. We've also got Trevor Latimer's book coming up, Small Isn't Beautiful, and looking forward to doing that. Also, I have a book from Justin Hollander coming as well called The First City on Mars. And we had Justin on maybe a year or so ago to talk about some other stuff, but I'm really excited to read his book about cities on Mars. I mean, I love space. I love the idea of building anything. And also, if it doesn't have to do with with that guy that owns Twitter, that'd be great. And of course, Yona is coming up with his annual prediction show. I've got a few other things in the works that I'm trying to get a hold of. I'm trying to get a hold of some folks in Spain. I'm trying to get a hold of Bruce Appleyard as well. We've kind of corresponded back and forth about his book about streets, that he kind of a revision of his dad's book, Donald Appleyard's book. So looking forward to maybe doing that as well. So lots of books coming up, lots of great discussions, I think, and hopefully you all are excited as well. I'm always excited because I'm searching for stuff that gets me excited to produce at Talking Headways and Mondays at the Overhead Wire for that matter. So we've got some great shows coming up. I hope everybody stays tuned and become a Patreon supporter if you want to keep these things coming. I mean, it really is cool. $10 a month, as we always say, gets you a scarf, a bus only or bike only scarf. I'm thinking about doing a transit scarf or a train scarf or something because folks have been asking about that. Maybe a walking one too. We need some diversity, but at the moment we've got the bike ones, we've got the bus ones. So check those out if you get a chance. Okay. So I'm going to do some local ads here for us, and then we're going to get to some news. So again, thanks to everybody who orders the bike and bus scarves. We really appreciate it. Go to theoverheadwire.com. And if you order 5 or more, we'll give you a 10% discount. Just mention that to me when you email me at theoverheadwire@gmail.com. And it's still cold out, so get your scarves. I know a couple of folks have gotten their scarves the last couple of days, and I think it's because it's cold out and it's raining. At least here in the Bay Area, it's been cold and raining. And so, and also, as I've said before, thanks everybody for posting when you wear them, on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, or even I saw some on LinkedIn. So it really makes me happy when I see those. It's really exciting. So get your scarves and stay warm. Also, don't forget to order any of the books that we've covered on the show, Talking Headways, on our bookshop site, bookshop.org/shop/The Overhead Wire. I do note that the bookshop doesn't carry every book. There's 2 books I know of that aren't in the bookshop shop just because bookshop doesn't carry them. So if those are your books, which I think is Dorina Pajani's book and Kevin Kryzak's book and David King's book, go to Springer or to Elgar, and you'll be able to get those books there, or actually walk into your local bookstore and ask for them. I know that they can order stuff that, Bookshop probably doesn't have. So do that if you get a chance, if those are the books that you're missing. If not, bookshop.org/shop/The Overhead Wire. Tons of really good books in there. A really great list of all the stuff that we've covered, all the people that we've talked to, and lots of fun stuff. Also, finally, we've designed some shirts and mugs or stickers or posters or whatever you want. The Cars Are Cholesterol sticker is super, super fun, and it's been really popular. The shirts have been doing very well. We're selling them at TeePublic, bit.ly/Cars Are Cholesterol, and they'll take you to the site. As I've told folks before, get the purple one. It's really fun, and I'm really excited about that design. And thanks to Richard Wazensky for doing that. You can actually follow him on Instagram at Dick David Sketches, as I mentioned in the Talking Headways podcast intro. Really cool artist, also a bike advocate. So support Richard over there as well. And finally, I've got an ad for the SF Urban Film Fest, March 6th through 11th here in San Francisco. Their 9th annual festival's theme is Rituals of the City. All events are in person at various venues all over San Francisco, including the Roxy Theater, the Exploratorium, and Outdoors 2 at Victoria Manilow Draves Park in Soma. Focusing on care rituals for urban environments, the Oscar-nominated documentary All That Breathes will screen at the Exploratorium on March 9th as part of the SF Urban Film Fest. For more information, go to www.sfurbanfilmfest.com. Now, I'm putting this out there because I hope at some point we can all go back to movie theaters. I miss the movie theater experience, but also just urban movies about cities. That I love that. I love that so much. Whether it's a dystopian movie, kind of like Blade Runner 2049, or whether it's a happy movie about cities, whatever it might be, I think that those are great. And so these are short films. Some of them are regular length, and I think check out the SF Urban Film Fest if you're here in San Francisco. I know a lot of you are around the country, around the world, but if you're here in San Francisco, I hope that you get a chance to check it out. Okay. This is episode 127. We are in session. And as I always let you know, you can get this podcast wherever you find your podcast, on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, and of course, Apple Podcasts. Thanks for subscribing to the podcatcher so you can get this show every week. We really appreciate it. RSS rules. Okay, the news. This is what you all been waiting for, I'm sure. Here are a few stories that piqued our interest from the newsletter over the last few weeks. This is taken from our newsletter, the Overhead Wire Daily. We have a premium and a basic version. The premium version you can subscribe to for a 2-week trial by going to theoverheadwire.com. The basic version, once you subscribe to the premium version for that 2-week trial, and if you don't want to take so much time, it'll set you into the basic version automatically, which is only 3 articles a day instead of 30. But I think there's still value, and you also find out what podcast guests we have, and if there's interesting things going on in the world. So it's kind of our daily newsletter to let you know what's going on with us, as well as what's going on around the world. Mostly what's going on around the world, because we don't like to focus on ourselves. I think that's what sets us apart, actually, from many of the other newsletters. Our newsletter is articles about other people. Most other people's newsletters are articles about themselves, and I think that that's really important to mention, that you're getting something in your inbox, but it's an inbox preview into the rest of the world. So anyways, here's some of the stories from the newsletter. The American Association of Railroads goes deep against railroad electrification. Many of the world's railroads are electrified, including in Europe and Asia, but the threat of climate change and the prospect of greater efficiency hasn't changed the minds of American railroad companies. In fact, the American Association of Railroads has written position papers lobbying against railroad electrification. Michael Bernard believes that railroads are woefully misrepresenting the facts and will cling to the diesel in the age of climate change for as long as they can. So this was written by Michael Barnard at Clean Technica. This was interesting to me in light of the Ohio derailment. Not like electrification had anything to do with that specifically, but there's been a lot of bashing on freight railroads and some mistakes by the freight railroads that's been increasing ever since the strike threats by the railroad workers. And I think that this is something that kind of brought it to a T. And this was something I'm sure Michael had been writing for a long time, even before, and working on for a long time, even before writing this in Clean Technica. But yeah, I find a lot of the write-ups for Ohio and the derailment, I haven't seen a ton of discussion about the electrification or rules or anything like that, but a lot of it's political stuff, and I think that's really dumb. I hope we can get something that's increases safety and get through all the kind of these political hurdles and kind of these culture war issues and make it about the railroads, because I think we can do better with the railroads in the United States. Anyways, about electrification. The story talks about how the American Association of Railroads leans on this study published by the University of Illinois Rail Transportation and Engineering Center. They say we can't electrify here in the United States because we don't have the population density. We have too many hills. We have too many trees that might fall over. We don't have off-the-shelf locomotives, those types of things. And Michael makes the argument that most of these locomotives are already diesel or electric, so why not add a pantograph on top? And also, many of the places that are electrified around the world don't have the population density. He mentions the Trans-Siberian Railway, which definitely does not have the population density that maybe the Northeast Corridor does, but it's still electrified. Also, we've done this before. I mean, the Milwaukee Road was an electrified route to the West Coast, and they went over hills and they were very powerful, actually. They could actually do more work with less train cars because of the electrification. They could generate more power. There's more torque in an electric engine. And we're finding that out from electric cars. They want to make these cars that go 0 to 60 in 2 seconds or whatever and beat out all these gas engines. But it's crazy that we don't have this real life discussion about what we already did in this country, including the Milwaukee Road. But the big reason they won't do it, they won't electrify, is because they own and maintain everything, and they don't want to maintain wires. Obviously, they can't maintain box cars or tank cars or track either. That we found that out over the last several years. Of course, there's been ton of derailments and a ton of stuff going on, and they don't want to spend money on it. They can maintain it, they can do it. The people are smart. The railroad workers are really, really great at that, but they're understaffed, and the railroad companies are buying back stock and all this stuff, and they just don't want to do it. And it's like transit agencies too; they don't want to maintain stuff. Here in San Francisco, you always hear the story about how Muni folks are grumpy about having the maintenance people about having so many different vehicles. There's trolley buses, there's diesel electric buses, there's soon going to be electric buses. They've got heritage streetcars, they've got Muni, LRVs, all kinds of stuff. And so it's like why can't we just have all diesel buses? I think there's a lot of yards that probably believe that in the United States. And so, I feel like the maintenance thing is a big thing, especially for these companies that own all of the track and all of the rolling stock and all of that stuff. And so, they're going to go to their death, try to not get rid of diesel freight trains. And they'll try to, push it to hydrogen, or they'll try to figure out how to get batteries in the trains. But really, I really feel that electrification through overhead wires is an easy way to do it. Easy as in it will actually be more beneficial than trying to mine all of the huge batteries that are needed for diesel size locomotives. They've even talked about electric box cars that can connect to a train too, which would be really interesting, an interesting idea. But here's the thing. Here's the reason why I think electrification is important. And so, in the journal Nature, there's a study that showed that nearly all U.S. locomotives are propelled by diesel-electric drives, which emit 35 million tons of CO2 and produce air pollution, causing about 1,000 premature deaths annually, accounting for approximately $6.5 billion in annual health damage costs. So, basically they're saying that there's so much impact by just these diesel engines. And I know that especially around ports, right? So the Port of LA, other ports like that. I know that there's been discussion about the Port of Oakland and Port of LA and maybe electrifying the yards because there's so much, from the trucks and the trains, the diesel trains that kind of lingers over those neighborhoods that are just surrounding them. And it would be really good to actually change that so that we actually have clean air around these areas. So Anyways, it's an interesting read. I think it's Michael did a good job of kind of laying out what the Association of American Railroads ideas are. They have they have a position paper that's called "Oppose Rail Electrification," which means you can tell what side they're on specifically. They're not trying to change anything. They don't want to do it. But I think leaning into electrification and going to overhead wires is better than making so many batteries, as I mentioned. But hey, that's me. Okay. Belgium's downtowns are cutting out cars. 2 cities in Belgium have seen success in reducing car usage in their downtowns. Brussels has seen a 19% reduction in cars and 23% increase in cycling during the morning commute in just 6 months of enforcement of its Good Move plan. Ghent's mayor, who is threatened over his city's active transportation scheme, has seen great success with a doubling of cycling and 12% increase in transit ridership. This was by Denis Balgaranov and Tom Heap in the Mayor.eu and in Sky News. Lots of places around the world are reducing car movement through downtowns. They're finding that increases in the use of bikes and transit and walking are happening because of that. It's also clearing up the air in these places. We saw recently in central London that NO2 concentrations have been reduced 46%. And still some Brits think that this is just a way to raise taxes and make people buy new cars. Well, it is kind of a way to make people buy new cars because then they'll have lower emissions vehicles to go through these lower emission zones. But, I mean, they must not be listening to the mayor of London when he said he got adult onset asthma at the age of 42 because of the air in London. And the reason why he's doing these low emission zones is to make it easier for people to breathe. And the typical protesters are being protesters and whatever else. But there's also, I guess these ideas about conspiracy theories, and they pop up a lot lately. And that actually kind of leans into our next story. And I think there's a lot of downtown areas in Europe, especially, that are trying to reduce car usage through the downtown. And that leads to the next item, which was by John Elledge in the New Statesman. And also there's been articles all over the place about this in CNN and The Guardian and New York Times and Slate and everywhere else talking about the 15-minute conspiracy theory. The 15-minute city, a development and design idea first proposed by Carlos Moreno, has been caught up recently with the conspiracy theory spin cycle. British writer John Elledge believes that if you mix worries about large global organizations with unfounded fears someone will take away your car and ban you from leaving your neighborhood, this is what you get. John is a friend. Obviously, he's been on the show a couple of times. We've been on his previous show at New Statesman, City Monitor, a few times, and that was really fun. But apparently, Oxford wanted to create a low-traffic downtown by creating traffic filters and tolls to reduce unnecessary cut-through traffic so that, basically you could actually get through town if you were a delivery or if you're a bus or if you're, another vehicle with high capacity, transit with high capacity transit. And so they were measuring like 5 miles per hour during rush hour through the town. And so they're trying to figure out a way to get around that and loosen up the traffic in the city. And so this scheme, the filtering scheme, would mean that you'd have to get a permit to pass through the filter. There's also a lot of other ways that they're allowing people. There's like 100 free days for residents, and there's you'll be allowed to visit people in there if you have friends inside the boundaries, etc. But people outside the city started to freak out when they figured out about this scheme, and they put it together with the 15-minute city idea, which was put together by Carlos Moreno, which is basically the same thing as like TOD or walkable urban neighborhoods or urbanism more generally. You want walkable cities so you don't have to drive your car. You could actually just get out and walk as if you lived in a neighborhood that had everything close by, so you didn't have to pop in the car and find a parking place every single time you went out. And, so it was all part of Oxford's overall plan, but the idea was confused by opposition, which led to an easier catchphrase to rage against. So traffic filters conspiracy isn't really that's not easy to form a conspiracy theory around, right? So the 15-minute city, now that's a beautiful thing to form a conspiracy thing around. It's so easy as a catchphrase. And so Then the usual suspects came out: Brexit champion Nigel Farage, Jordan Peterson, Tory members of British Parliament started spouting gobbledygook, and it got amplified on TikTok and other social media flying around the world. There's been protests with little girls standing up and yelling about how they how their lives are going to be ruined by traffic filters, and even talking about how they're the opposite of Greta Thunberg, which is crazy to me. Why you would want to be the evil Greta, but to each their own. But they all believe that they're about to have their freedoms impinged by this new world order of better town planning, which is hilarious to me. And all these people saying, we'll never be able to go to other neighborhoods or visit our friends ever again. And to me, this is just kind of tied to this crazy idea that people have about world orders or something, about Agenda 21, for example, a UN conspiracy theory that we've been talking about in planning circles for 2 decades now, maybe 3 decades now, pushed by NIMBYs and conservative politicians that are freaked out you're going to steal their truck and take away their gas stove and all these other things. The freak out over UN planning principles over and over again. It's been going on for the last 2-3 decades. It's funny that The Guardian's architecture critic Ollie Wainwright came up and said it's in part because Moreno is French for British people, as if walkability was a French idea. But this is all about othering, right? This is all about making the other and dangerous, and making this idea dangerous, when it's really about planning. It's all about good city planning, and it's the target for fears and perhaps maybe what some of the folks would like to do to their opposition. I suspect there's always a bit of projection going on. Anytime anybody says, "Oh, well, you're doing this because of this," I have to wonder if that's what they would like to do if they were in charge. But my favorite summary from the conspiracy theorists was relayed to us by Henry Grabar in Slate, which is this is great. Having successfully implemented COVID-19 lockdowns and forced vaccination, local governments like Oxfordshire will now impose a Hunger Games-style district system that confines residents inside their own neighborhoods, nominally to stop climate change, but actually to control the populace. This system, known as the 15-minute city, because that's how long your leash is part of the Great Reset, a post-pandemic new world order developed by the World Economic Forum. We're talking about city councils starting to take control and starting to herd people into carefully controlled spaces. Henry found that on a bulletin. City planners, we just want to walk to the grocery store, people. We just want to walk to the grocery store. I think it's silly. Obviously, some people don't, and I guess that's their right. But I just want to create a city where people can walk to the grocery store, can go to the hardware store, can go to CVS or whatever and get their medicine without having to hop in a car. But that's me. Okay, next up. Homes in flood zones are overvalued by billions. New research at the journal Nature Climate Change has found that homes in American cities in a flood zone are likely overvalued by billions of dollars. For years, the National Flood Insurance Program incentivized developers to build in low-lying areas, but as worsening climate change causes greater and more frequent flooding, more properties are impacted in impacted areas will be devalued. This was by Zoya Terstein in Grist. So this makes sense. That's, because we haven't reckoned with the real impacts of climate change yet. Property markets are still humming along without that impact. And as soon as they are impacted, the property values in those places will go down tremendously. And I'm sure the insurance companies and authorities, emergency authorities, will be on the hook. But there's really real impacts to this flooding. I personally look for things, specifically when I was looking at houses, liquefaction zones, flood maps, anything dangerous that you can see if there's trouble brewing. A home purchase is a lot of money. You're giving somebody a lot of money, your hard-earned money. And I'm surprised that, at least insurance companies aren't a bit more discerning about, and even, property appraisers about these property values in some places that are in low-lying areas. If I were in a place where I was purchasing a house, I would look at the 200-year flood zone and try to purchase outside of that, because those 100 and 200 year flood zones are actually getting smaller and smaller. I mean, in Houston specifically, they had like 4 or 5 100-year floods in the last 20 years. So that's crazy, and that means that the flood maps aren't really correct. So you should see if the area flooded before, and if you're looking for a place. And also, this is crazy that all these places are valued by so much. There's gonna, if there is going to be some type of property crash, it might be caused by some flash storm or crazy climate change activity, sea level rise, those types of things. I can't believe all those places that are on the waterfront in cities around the country, and they don't, people aren't freaking out about that, especially in places like Miami. It was just there for that conference, Revolution conference, now Impact. And I was just noticing that all these places are so close to the water, and all it takes is a few feet to be inundated, and it would scare the crap out of me. Seriously, scare the crap out of me as somebody who spent so much money on a house. That's crazy. Okay, rethinking 1 hour delivery. Hazel O'Neill suggests levying a same-day delivery tax to incentivize consumers to make more sustainable choices while directing this revenue to improve transit that could reduce emissions and congestion. If municipalities optimize their delivery systems through conscious curb management, centralized neighborhood delivery nodes, and alternative last-mile mobility solutions, then the negative impact on our cities, labor, and climate can be mitigated. This was by Hazel O'Neill in Streetsblog USA. So aside from the same-day delivery thing, we should be really, in terms of transportation policy, we should really be limiting how much these rent-seeking these delivery companies can do. I mean, some of them are charging like 30% just to get orders for these restaurants. And if anything, we should be creating systems that create high costs for these companies so that customers start realizing you can go out and get your own food. Sometimes a delivery is necessary, and I don't mind a good pizza delivery or food delivery from time to time because it can be very, useful, and if you're crunched for time. But I try to go out and actually go get the food from the restaurants directly these days, and that's so they can keep the money to themselves instead of being subject to this arbitrage by a lot of these companies who are just kind of, they're trying to kind of skim off the top of what these restaurants are doing, and it's kind of frustrating, I think, to me. But from the other impacts, transportation impacts and stuff, a same-day delivery tax would be great because that means that people will actually be a little bit more patient about getting stuff. I mean, I there's very few things I feel like I need in a day. You can get it in a couple days, maybe a week. That'd be fine. If you're ordering online, you have to kind of grapple with those climate costs too. We had folks on before and mentioning, I think it was Ron Milam even that was like talking about how, even if you're staying inside, or if you stay at home or work from home and don't go out much and don't drive much, you still have a climate impact from all the deliveries you get, made to your place, if that's the way that you're getting things. So there's that to be said as well. Okay, one last item in the main items, and then we'll get to the bonus items, and then we'll be out of here. So Wales rethinks road expansion in a climate change era. 35 of 50 road projects in Wales were halted after they were tested for climate impacts as part of a larger strategy to think long-term about the environment and mobility futures. Wales was also forced to rethink investments after funding from the UK government dwindled. It's likely the cancellations will lead to more active transportation and longer-term thinking on climate change. This was by Stephen Morris in The Guardian. And this is what Colorado is starting to do and is really the way of the future. Fix it first. Focus on, not expanding highways and not expanding big roads, but also we need better accounting about where the value is in the transportation spending, and not just from road projects, from transit projects, from anything. There needs to be penalties for overages and roadblocks from cities that keep us from getting to our climate goals and our access goals as well. And I think that that's kind of the key, is setting goals and make sure we can reach them. And the goals shouldn't be, as we've mentioned a couple of episodes ago, the goals shouldn't be mobility-based. They should be access-based and trying to get people to where they need to go, not necessarily just building a road to make it faster for someone to go from point A to point B, which are no points at all, generally. Okay, I got some quick items here. I'm not going to go into too much detail about these, but these were some items that I thought were interesting, but weren't necessarily the top items like the ones previously in the newsletter. So, expanding homes underground could get a bit easier in Utah if a bill passes allowing expansion without local approval. Park City officials believe that one of their rich residents is trying to go around local planning and historic district rules. This was by KPCW in Park City. This one was fascinating. This article is funny. The person, I guess, wants to build underground because they limit what you can build above ground. And so the local officials are like, oh my gosh, now we can't regulate it. Now we can't regulate the building styles in our downtown and the historic nature of it. And I'm like, it's all underground. Like, you don't have to worry about it. If it's just somebody's extra square footage for their house, why are you worried about, a historic district? It's not going to show up as historic architecture or anything like that. It's just really funny that way, how that works. So if it can't be regulated, it must be bad, right? I think if you want to keep a historic district looking the same way, maybe you should allow people to build underground. That would be easier. We had a whole really good episode about building underground, which was really cool. Check that out if you get a chance. So building materials can be extensively recycled after a building is taken down, but how much might that cost to do so? In Massachusetts, it costs $140 per ton for landfill costs, but only $21 per ton for recycling. These numbers should be considered when designing and renovating buildings. This is an ArchDaily. And then also there's an article in BBC Future, basically talking about how the construction and built environment typically makes up 5% of emissions globally, and tearing down existing buildings fills up landfills really fast. So those two are kind of tied together. And I think that's really interesting, how much it costs to put stuff in the landfill versus how much it costs to recycle. So when you're tearing down a building or when you're tearing down a building to build a new building, maybe recycling is the best way to go. A study from researchers at the University of Maryland Public School of Health found that neighborhoods with more sidewalks and crosswalks were connected to reductions in obesity and blood pressure, while more streetlights and road signs were linked to a lower prevalence of cancer and lower cholesterol. They connected these dots by looking at 164 million Google Street View images and comparing them against census and CDC data. This was in Bloomberg City Lab. Now, this one is one that I thought that everybody was going to be interested in, but nobody really was, which is crazy. Maybe it's because it wasn't at the top of the list that day. But storefront car crashes happen at a clip of about 100 times per day, but no storefront seems to be impacted as much as convenience stores such as 7-Eleven. The crashes are an expensive liability for stores if they don't take simple precautions such as installing concrete bollards. A recent lawsuit garnered a man who lost his legs from a car $91 million from a 7-Eleven after he was pinned by a vehicle crashing into the store. So apparently some of these store owners think that bollards are too expensive, but the insurance impacts of not putting in bollards is way more apparently. Just ask this 7-Eleven owner who, I guess 7-Eleven more generally, who has to pay $91 million, which is probably from insurance, but still they're going to be putting bollards in front of 7-Elevens and convenience stores from here on out. New Transport for London data shows that reducing speed... Well, also I want to go back. Hang on one second. 100 times per day that cars crash into storefronts. That's crazy. I mean, I can't even imagine what it takes to... I guess it's all people slipping on their gas pedals or something. That's just bonkers. Sorry, I had to go back. I was just like, wait a second, I didn't talk about this. It's 100 times per day. 100 times per day that somebody crashes into a convenience store with a car. Says something about convenience stores, also cars maybe. New Transport for London data shows that reducing speed limits to 20 miles per hour around the city has reduced collisions, both resulting in death and fatal injuries, as well as collisions overall by 25%. The 20 miles per hour speed limit in central London was introduced in March of 2020. This was in Intelligent Transport. Next up, data analyzed by Bloomberg News reporters shows that remote work cost the city $12 billion a year in spending office workers usually wouldn't make. That spending seems to be happening elsewhere in the city outside of Manhattan, with more people staying close to home, but the impact where offices are located appears to be huge. Bloomberg. In an attempt to rein in housing shortages, Amsterdam will be more strict about vacant housing while also facilitating home sharing and encouraging older residents of large family homes to transition to retirement homes. Citizens gave the city around 1,000 suggestions for what could potentially help with the housing crunch. So this was in Euractiv. I found that interesting. They're going to actually kind of support people living together, and then also trying to get older residents to move out of large family homes once they're I guess empty nesters or super empty nesters, and then move to retirement homes. I feel like nobody ever wants to be pushed out of their home, and not everybody wants to go to a retirement home. But there are a lot of instances where people get trapped in their homes. They want to go somewhere else, but they don't have the means, and maybe the state or maybe the Netherlands helping them do that is good. But hopefully nobody's pushed out. That's not good. Okay, and A court ruling has halted plans for by the city of Los Angeles to cut down 12,000 shade trees to fix sidewalks. The city was looking to comply with a 2016 class action settlement, which requires the spending of $1.4 billion on sidewalk access for those with disabilities. Crazy, 12,000 trees. Come on, stop with this dumb stuff. This summer, Berlin will eliminate all parking spaces in a single neighborhood, testing the waters for the future car-free city. But as expected, the move has sparked a war of words as details are held back before local elections. And actually, the local elections were held since I wrote this initially, this kind of intro. And I guess the more conservative party won. I don't know what that means for the neighborhood and the car-free city, but I think it actually might still go forward. I think they were working on it from the city perspective, and maybe it won't change much, but maybe it will. Who knows? And finally, there was an interesting article in the Washington Post on why teenagers aren't driving as much as previous generations. Many are pointing to the fact that it's just easy to connect with friends online, but the article had a mental health counselor, and it went a bit deeper and found that sometimes there's fear of greater responsibility and getting older in these teenagers' minds that keeps them from getting licenses. And also, I mean, if your mom's been chauffeuring you around forever, who's to say that they're going to stop unless they make you get out and get a license? But a number of years ago, I read this really fascinating article in National Geographic, and I know I've mentioned it on the show a number of times, but it was about the wiring of teenage brains. And our brains are still really developing until our mid-20s or so. And that last period of growth is where our brain gets us to take risks, to jump out of the proverbial nest, right? To leave the house, to go somewhere else. I mean, I went to college, people go to college, people go out, they move across the country or whatever they might do. They take more of those risks when they're younger. It's commendable to have some of that fear related to like responsibility and even driving around huge vehicles. But I also wonder if teen brains have changed over time as well compared to previous. I don't really have any evidence of this, but these 2 points, the teen brain article and then the reduction in driving license acquisition, makes me wonder if these two things are connected. I mean, there's a few things that come to mind, like helicopter parenting. There's not allowing kids to bike or walk to school anymore, or explore when they're younger. Maybe they're just like, they've stayed at home their whole lives or been driven around their whole lives and don't really have a want to go outside because they don't know what's out there, and everything's online. Everything is accessible through that. So maybe that's something that is part of it. I don't know, but it's an interesting thought. It's an interesting thought experiment. And I'm wondering, what the connection might be between how teenage brains work and maybe they're getting kind of knocked out early on in life because of some of the changing actions of parents and others around them. This week and every week, I want to thank our generous Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome and keep the show going by listening and supporting each month. This show and Talking Headways really wouldn't be here without it, so thank you very much. And you can support the show by going to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. And you can do so for $2 a month and get some stickers and a handwritten note that I'll send to you with some really cool stamps. And then also $10 a month will get you one of the transportation scarves. And I'll email and ask you which one you want, and we'll send you one. I also want to mention that we did produce an audiobook version of Raymond Unwin's 1909 classic, Town Planning in Practice. Get your hands on one by going to raymondunwin.com. Again, if you want to support us on Patreon, that's patreon.com/theoverheadwire. Or you can go to theoverheadwire.com and check out all the stuff that we've got going on. Okay, listener questions and comments. If you have a comment or question, feel free to tweet at us or comment on any of the social sites where the podcast appears, or feel free to email us at theoverheadwire@gmail.com. This one comes from across the pond. Hey, Jeff, I hope you're doing well. This is Nima from Iran. I recently started listening to your podcast, and it's been really great so far. As someone who tries and wants to get better at English and talk like a native American, listening to your episodes helps a lot. I like the variety of topics as well. Please keep it up. And thanks, Nima, for your kind note. I was kind of giggling there because you said Native American, which I am definitely not a Native American. That's the folks that were here before the Europeans came from your side of the Atlantic Ocean. But a person who lives in America, they speak there's varying differences in our dialects and around the country. I think mine's kind of a California neutral, but I'm not sure also that you want to learn English from listening to me, though some of the guests on Talking Headways and guests here on Mondays at the Overhead Wire are probably good to learn from. You have some really good speakers that come through and talk with me about all these topics. But I hope you keep listening, and I hope someday I can visit Iran. it sounds like a beautiful country from all that I've seen on TV, and there's so many places I wish I could go around the world, and I hope everything can open up at some point so that everybody can go to visit the places that they want to visit, which would be really great because there's some really cool places like Iran. I'm sure there's plenty of beautiful spots there in the cities and everything like that. I think Rick Steves went a number of years ago, and he had a really good documentary on the country and going and all the food and the people and stuff like that. So I might go revisit that at some point soon. But thanks, Nima, for your kind note. Okay, puppies and butterflies. This is the part of the show where we talk about something fun, interesting, or maybe just didn't fit in the other sections. Lastly, we've been watching a bunch of home renovation shows and Lego Masters. And I wish there was a Lego TV show when I was a kid. Lego Masters is fun. It's just like really cool. I hope at some point they like build a whole city. That would be really cool. Right now they do spaceships and they do bucking broncos and stuff that I've seen. I mean, I know the show kind of happened in the fall, but we're still just kind of catching up to it now. And early on, I mean, I still have tons of Lego, I should say. They don't say Legos with an S. It's not good. Early on, I was building Star Wars ships before that was actually a set type back in the mid-90s. And I just love Lego so much. And I love that there's a show called Lego Masters and people build stuff. It's just fun, which is cool. So anyways, lots of TV going on, but lots of good food, but not much else, just kind of taking care of the kiddo and doing that type of thing. So in any event, you can find me on Twitter at The Overhead Wire or at theoverheadwire.com. You can find me on Mastodon at theoverheadwire.sfba.social. Thanks for joining us at Mondays at The Overhead Wire. Thanks to our generous patrons for sponsoring this week's podcast. We'll see you, though, next time.
Talking